I mean, there's no doubt that the Royal Commission into the institutional responses to childhood sexual abuse has changed the environment that we see child abuse in Australia. However, I think that the pre-Royal Commission was really about people with lived experience advocating to be heard, to break the secrecy, to have the Australian public understand that crimes had been committed, they had been covered up, and powerful institutions were responsible for that. The post-Royal Commission environment is about trauma and putting the whole issue of child abuse and how institutions responded into a trauma framework only, when in fact it should be about trauma justice and restoration of people into society, and that people would be more understood if they accessed services, if they were seeking help. And I think that's the bit of work that we've got to continue to do post-Royal Commission. People have got redress, people have got civil litigation access for physical, psychological and sexual abuse in most states. I think these are really critical issues for the justice system to have addressed, but they're not the whole story. That unfortunately justice doesn't occur just in the justice system. Justice is about how you connect up the multiple systems that respond to people's needs, and I think we've got a lot more work to do with that. So, most of us have been very focused on how do people get access to understanding what options they have, whether that is the civil litigation process or the redress process. I don't think we achieved an equitable response through the Royal Commission, unfortunately, but it is what it is, so everyone is accessing what they can live with, what their choice is, what is their best chance of receiving some form of reparation financially, even though everybody will tell you that's not the only thing people need in terms of redress and healing from what occurred to them as children in institutions that were set up to protect them. I think the most meaningful changes for survivors that have come out of the Royal Commission is that for those who did present, they did feel heard, and they felt a sense of ownership to what came out of the Royal Commission. Not everyone was happy with all the recommendations, as you'd expect, and some of the lingering issues continue to be lingering issues that the Royal Commission, despite consultation with people with lived experience, did only focus on child sexual abuse, when for many people who lived in institutional out-of-home care, the separation of physical, sexual and psychological abuse is a very hard process in itself, and it's very hard to have one form of abuse validated but not others. So I think that continues to be a journey for a lot of survivors in how things get siloed and segmented, and but I think overall people feel very proud that they contributed to a Royal Commission occurring in the first place. They didn't always feel that they were listened to in the consultation processes leading up to it, and they didn't feel that they were heard about everything they wanted for redress. However, most people accept that they achieved what it is, so it is what it is, and people make decisions now based on that reality. So obviously what meaningful changes have happened, I think, is that some people have got access to a civil litigation process, some have got access to the redress scheme, but there are still many that none of these schemes really can meet their criteria, or they don't have the evidence that would meet that criteria. So that remains to be something that we still need to consider, that there's a whole population of people out there who redress and civil litigation isn't for, and that we should really be providing the kind of therapeutic and practical assistance and case management services that those people need to live a meaningful life, and just accept that the impact of abuse has impacted on their quality of life today. It also impacts on how they access services today. So for many people who are in our mental health system, correction systems, presenting to ED frequently, unnecessary hospitalisations, when you look at their history, many are people that were abused in an institutional setting, and the reason they struggle with these settings is because they find it hard to trust and not expect an abuse of power to occur again. They're the unmet needs, I think, that if you're not going through the legal system, if you're not going through redress, and even if you are and your needs extend beyond that, how can you access services? Because while some people are getting into services that meet their needs, there's a whole lot who don't, because in order to get the right service at the right time, someone needs to be helping them navigate the impact of their trauma as a child, and often ongoing trauma as an adult. But we can't forget that trauma is not just about them or their psychological mindset. It's also about how professionals behave and act and use their power. So many times we have, sort of battles of power going on that are often, used to exclude people or leave people without access to services. And I think the more we can understand that people's behaviour is what's impacted when they front up for a professional service, because they are so fearful, they're so triggered about another experience of abuse occurring, then it's not just about understanding the psychological nature or vicarious trauma, because those issues of behaviour are real. They are grounded in the abuse of power as much as the actual physical or sexual or psychological abuse that occurred. I think that a lot of forgotten Australians that I still talk to would love to see, the word everybody uses is a gold card. We know that there won't be a gold card, but what there should be is an absolute commitment by federal and state governments to establishing programs that are ongoing and recurrent, that will meet the psychosocial and practical needs that people as they age, and their children are often now children going into the care system or going into juvenile justice, people coming out of prison, those people who identify as having a childhood of being in care, they need ongoing services, for the rest of their life, that really understand that issue of being in care and the abuse of power which may have occurred, whether that was about the decision to go into care in the first place or whether it was an experience of physical, psychological or sexual abuse, that those things don't go away. They transition as people transition through different phases of their life. I think that for people that have experienced abuse in other institutions, the issues are exactly the same, like swimming. Some of the Paralympians, some of the people in swimming who have represented Australia, and yet instead of being in a safe place experienced abuse, all those people will have the lingering impact of that trust, and alongside the impacts of the actual abuse, and it'll affect them in their careers and in their family life as they move forward. So we need specialist services that understand both the dynamics of family, childhood abuse, but also the specific nature of institutional abuse, which is basically how people responded who were supposed to be caring and protecting people as children, how they responded to disclosures of abuse and how they let the abuse occur in the first place, are critical to the way people heal or access justice. The redress scheme works for people who make that decision to use that process to seek some sort of restoration and justice. You know, we all know there's limits to the scheme. I think the biggest gap is the acknowledgement that an application is an application, but then all the issues that arise from putting that application in mean people need psychological, therapeutic, psychosocial support, and really our systems and services have been designed to focus on the application, not on the matters and issues that arise for people in making that application. And I think that we need to consider that in the next few years, because it's irresponsible to open all that up and then not say to people, well, we understand the legacy of this trauma and this abuse and how it's impacted on your life. And there are specialist services that can respond to that, because it is a specialist set of skills and knowledge, but that specialist knowledge doesn't operate in isolation. It still operates by connecting and navigating mainstream services, understanding the services people are entitled to, really looking at the financial implications of what people could access but can't because of poverty or not enough income. So all those issues haven't gone away just by having a redress scheme. You know, we have to remember the voices of people who experienced abuse in institutional care. Whatever that institution was, they were all meant to care and protect a child, and they didn't. And their contexts are quite different. But we do need to put their legacy back on the table for what they all have called for, is that service systems and the public understand that this is part of Australia's history, and that service systems would change to accommodate their needs and expectations and experiences in a much greater way than what we have to date, because our focus has really been around redress. And I don't think redress, we know from the Ford Foundation, from the Ford inquiry in the beginning, which was over 25 years ago, that the legacy of abuse stays with them. And what people want is they can get services that understand this at any transition point in their life. So we hear a lot of people now with aged care wanting to understand how the aged care systems works. We've seen some response by PHNs putting out navigator positions that will have included Forgotten Australians as a priority group. But we need this in a lot more areas. Mental health is a huge issue, that how we respond to mental health, how people get access to the services and treatment they need, how it's community-based and not institutional-based, and how we can make sure that we don't confuse the prevention of child abuse with the ongoing understanding and development of a professional system that responds to people who are adults and who live with the legacy of child abuse in their life.